if we don't deal with this. Remember, I also emphasize the necessity of congruence between new and old. You follow what I mean by congruence. New will never work. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, how long ago was it when we were students in Princeton? 35 years ago. The first piece of work that I ever got published as a young scholar was a completely, in those days, eccentric argument to be made in the Western world that Turkey's Kemalist experience will fail. And my argument was that it was a good thing, but it will fail because it lost its roots. It was not connected to itself. I don't know how many of you know Urdu poetry. You see this in every walk of life. You see this in culture, you see this in music, you see this in poetry. Urdu language produced an array of wonderful writers, the progressive writers in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. 3 or 4 are remarkable poets there. The most popular, the most block-busting one here is Faiz Ahmad Faiz. Those of you who don't know Urdu, don't worry, just listen. Is Faiz Ahmad Faiz. Blockbuster. Goes to Calcutta, 500,000 people turn up to listen to him. It's a Bengali-speaking city. Okay? There are at least 2 his contemporaries who are greater poets. Nun Mim Rashid, in my view, and Miraji. Greater than Faiz. All 3, the progressive writers, one characteristic was they broke from tradition. Nothing, we don't want the old tradition. We don't want old subject. They all broke from tradition. Miraji, they all wrote free verse. No radif, no qafiya. Radif wal qafiya khalas. They all wrote free verse. In the free verse of Miraji, you have the sounds of W.B. Yeats. Not the sounds of anything that Urdu had known before. Put your ears to it. Ibtada mein sirf anjani nigahoं की कहानी थी, मगर अब नर्म आवाज़ों की मौत आ गई क्यों? दूर सूरज, दूर सागर, लहर में हर एक किरण थी दूर दूर, हाथ के पास आया हाथ सोचकर. That's Miraji. We have forgotten him, except for great literary critics. Faiz. तेरे होठों के फूलों की चाहत में हम, तेरे होठों के फूलों की चाहत में हम दार की खुश टहनी पे मारे गए, सूलियों पर हमारे लबों से परे, तेरे होठों की लाली लपकती रही, तेरे जिस्मों की चांदी दमकती रही, तेरे जुल्फों की मस्ती बरसती रही. Free verse harks back, reminds you, invokes your memory of the classical tradition. It is not the classical tradition. It invokes the memory of the classical tradition. That's what we need to do with our civilization. It has to be new and old mixed into a symphony, and you can't do it without reconstruction of thought. I'm partly answering your question.
Thank you.
Any other?
Yes, I just have a comment, and my comment is based on the first comment that has been made here, and also in your brief lecture, you talked about, the...
Well, I'm going to interrupt you. You are the first person. Thank you for calling it brief.
You have mentioned different states, that the Muslim countries have gone through. You have mentioned that in order for us to adapt to the democratic systems, we have tried the Western model. We have tried also to break away from the Western model. And in both ways, we couldn't make it. And we are, at the time being, in a state of malaise. Okay? If I call back the model of the Western democracy, the way it has been established, I think from my readings, it abolished, the system that the state and the church was linked. Okay, there has been a separation between the state and the church. Are you suggesting that in order for us in Muslim countries to adapt to that model in other way, to also make a separation between the mosque or the religious, establishment and the political system?
I'm getting blockbuster questions here. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Let me try something with you. I have argued in the past that two groups of people have one thing in common. The ulama, the contemporary ulama of Islam and the contemporary Orientalist, the Western scholar of Islam, have one thing in common. They have many things in common. I will say only one at the moment. They both look at Islam textually. They both refuse to examine Islam and Islamic history as a lived reality. Okay? Now, in relation to your question, it is said by both that in Islam there is no separation between religion and politics. I have heard it said by most Orientalists, in fact, if not by all of them, and this is what is the position of our Islamists and of our ulama. My argument with you is, please let us look into the matter more deeply. Historically, religion and politics have been functionally separated in Islamic history. I said functionally. Technically speaking, the Khilafat ended in 950 when the Buwayhid intervention took place. The man on the horseback started messing around with us. Once men on the horseback started messing around with it, the very notion of the caliphate as providing the centrality of the unity between religion and politics in Islam was gone. From the moment of the Prophet's death to the Buwayhid intervention, our community has been divided primarily on the issue of how to organize life. What will be the relationship between religion and politics? Or more importantly, between religion and power. The Shia-Sunni struggle the Khawarij Sunni struggle, the Khawarij Shia struggle, all of it have been about that issue. What I am suggesting, miss, is not to take a Western model, but to examine our own history, come up with, because the Western model is no one model. You had a Jeffersonian model in which there is a total separation of religion and politics, and then slowly the American president started taking his oath of office on the Bible. When every 4 years some joker stands up there after having been elected, holds the Bible and says, I take the oath that I will uphold the Constitution. It's a secular American Constitution to uphold which the President of the United States swears on the Bible. In England, you have a constitutional requirement that the head of the state will always be a member of the Church of England. The head of the Church of England. Yes, did I say member? So you see, these forms are many. For one thing, there is a misconception floating around all over the world, including this room. There is such a thing as Western model of democracy. There isn't. There is a Western model of fascism, 4 different models of fascism. There are different models, Western models of socialism and communism. There are about, I haven't counted them, but I think there are about 7 or 8 Western models of democracy. What is really important here are values, not forms. Values institutionalized. Accountability of ruler to the ruled is a value. When Omar went around from house to house saying, would you take bay'ah with me as a caliph? He was saying, would you enter a social contract with me as citizen of the Islamic community? Omar was making an interesting democratic statement. You see what I'm trying to say to you? Accountability is a value. How you will institutionalize it, that is a different question. We can debate and differ on that, but we will reach an agreement. If we believe in it, we'll reach an agreement. 2, freedom of press, freedom of association, freedom of speech is a value. What the safeguards will be, how it will be ensured, where the buck will stop, those are things that change. Pornography was banned in America 50 years ago. They have redefined the issue of freedom to not be able to ban pornography. Now, somebody is going to scream at me. I am in favor, in my countries at least, of banning pornography. I think it's disrespectful to women. I think it's harmful to children. You see what I'm saying? But once we know the value, we have the commitment to the value, then we can negotiate what lines we draw, what we don't draw. So in that's the only argument. How much separation with religion? I have my views on it. I would say this. In the Western world, every day, ad nauseum, Israel has been described as the only democracy in the Middle East. I cannot accept the idea that Israel is a democracy. And I'll tell you why. Because it discriminates by law Jews from non-Jews as citizens. Therefore, I am against discrimination of Muslim citizens and non-Muslim citizens. This is not acceptable to me in Pakistan, in Egypt, or anywhere. I have no problem with calling Pakistan an Islamic state, as long as this Islamic state does not have two different definitions of citizenship. Citizenship is a value, okay? Etc. I partly answered your question, sister, more later.
But Ahmed, when you are speaking about the crisis and how different people try to solve those problems, you mentioned it also, the negative experience the Muslims had with the West. It seems you do not connect those. How can the people who had that experience now accept Westernization as a model? That's why my question. What the people, the Westernized intellectuals, I think failed is to show what kind of, or what parts of democracy and Westernization can go along with Islam. But if the Westernized intellectuals are trying to sell democracy as a, what you call, whole state, with all its negative aspects and errors, I think that the Muslims will not buy it. So the best, I think, way to sell democracy is if they can impart today a new way of, say, showing the Muslims what can we as Muslims take Western, which I believe there are many parts in the Western system or in democracy that can be applied to the Muslim countries. So what we want is how can we be selective? Because we don't want to buy that whole thing. Thank you.
I think I have followed the basic drift of what you're saying, but I'm not sure I followed everything. So if I am answering the question wrong, stop me.
Can I repeat it?
No, I think I have followed it. If you think I have not misunderstood you, then you repeat it. But first let me see if I have understood you. I have argued 2 or 3 things here that I want to repeat in answer to, very briefly repeat. Number one, I argued that our experience with Western democracies has been bitter. It has been of conquest, it has been of colonization, and it has been of unjust exploitation. Okay? So one, our experience with democracy and Western democracies has not been one that can encourage us to go for democracy, if we see it as Western. My second argument has been that even after we became independent, decolonized, the West is not a friend of democracy. The West doesn't want us to be democratic. That is why they kept supporting undemocratic governments everywhere, in the Muslim world as well as in the non-Muslim third world, Latin America, Africa, everywhere. So they are really not friends of democracy, for good reason, because their interests are not served by democratic regimes. Think of this. Most of the governments against which the United States moved in the Cold War period, Mohammad Mossadegh of Iran, Arbenz of Guatemala, they were all Democrats. Last point I am making, therefore, is that democracy is not Western. Democracy is a product of industrialism, capitalism, market, and social change, which happened in the West at a certain time. You see what I'm saying? Just because it happened in the West first doesn't mean that it is Western. There are certain principles involved that appeal to people in certain conditions. When it rains, you want an umbrella. When it is cold, you want to put on a jacket. When it is industrial and urbanized and open markets and science is taking over, you want a system of government in which citizens communicate more easily, governments listen more easily, access is more easy. It has to do with social conditions. Therefore, I don't see democracy as a Western thing. There are in the West some countries that practice democracy, some that don't, and some that have been fascists, including our great Hitler. He was not exactly a Muslim, you know. That's what the Western scholars seem to forget all the time. They call us an authoritarian culture. Go ahead.
Okay, instead of saying Western, I would say secular democracy, where, for example, what you said, often say the right to say whatever you want or to criticize is also to malaise, to mock, to all this, like the support that Salman Rushdie got from the West. So if that is the type of democracy you are calling for,
no, I'm not.
What they say is, for example, killing God or killing religion.
That is not democracy.
No, we can meet them.
No. I hope you will listen to me.
The last question goes to Shukri.
Professor Ahmed, thank you for a very interesting lecture. It's a kind of bizarre question. Just because it happened at this time of age, the Western world having to be the major power, industrializing and technology and industry and everything, I think we tend to have the view that this is the best system available. And they keep pressuring the Middle East and the other Islamic countries to adapt those systems. They push Kuwait, Saudi Arabia to have parliamentary systems, and they do this all over the place. So in a way, I guess I disagree with you when I say that at least liberal democracy is not a Western system. I think it's purely Western. And it's a combination of a couple of questions that other people asked earlier. Do you see this form of democracy fitting in an Islamic state? And at the same time, with consideration for our culture and the kind of mentalities that we have in the Middle East, are we ready for such a democracy, even if it would fit with an Islamic frame?
This is the hardest question to answer, and I will tell you why. I have not understood so far, and honestly I have tried, what is an Islamic state in modern times? After Pakistan was created, the ulama and politicians of Pakistan debated every day in the Constituent Assembly and outside of the Constituent Assembly. This one question: what is Islamic State? And no four of them agreed. What they did finally do was to pass a constitution which was almost a carbon copy of the British Constitution, the Government of India Act 1935,